And this is KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio. The following commentary is not necessarily the opinions of the staff, management, or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. It is the opinions of the guest and the host. That being said, it's time to talk a little bit about some of the things coming up in the community. I think I do have on the air with me Howie Klein.
That's me.
All right. Hey, you are a retired music executive. Your career included a dozen years as president of Reprise Records, and blog at Down with Tyranny, blogspot.com. And
Actually, you don't need the blog spot in there. It's just downwithtyranny.com.
Okay. All right. And you've been following the career of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and her role as the DNC's chairman or chairwoman. So the big DNC conference for the presidential elections coming up in Philadelphia here this July, and she is going to be in charge.
Maybe.
Well, and I've read a bit about her too, and it seems like she has a little baggage that she's brought along into that position, and she's very friendly with Hillary Clinton. And my question is why did President Obama choose Debbie Wasserman Schultz over 100 other Democratic Party officials that could have been in charge?
I don't think that President Obama cared one way or the other who was going to be the head of the DNC. He just knew that he would make the ultimate decisions about anything that was important to him, and they would carry it out. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz followed. Let me start from the beginning. When Obama became president, his first appointment was Rahm Emanuel. So Rahm Emanuel is very much like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He's a conservative New Dem. The New Dems are a coalition of Democrats in Congress. You could think of them as the Republican wing of the Democratic Party. So when Obama was elected, the first thing he did was appoint Rahm Emanuel to be his chief of staff. Rahm Emanuel couldn't wait to fire Howard Dean, who was the chairman of the DNC. He hated Howard Dean. He hated everything about Howard Dean. He especially hated something called the 50-state strategy, which was Howard Dean's idea to make the Democratic Party viable in every state, and it meant long-term planning. It meant that you invested now to build a party that was viable in many years. So in other words, Rahm Emanuel, when he ran the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, didn't believe in investing even in the following year. He only invested in something that would immediately show results. Whereas Howard Dean had a very different idea, like let's make the Texas Democratic Party viable so that we can win seats there 10 years from now. Rahm flipped out over that, and he hated Howard Dean. He hated everything about Howard Dean. If you remember, Howard Dean is the one who came up with the phrase, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. That, of course, offends people who are, like Rahm Emanuel and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Republican wing of the Democratic Party. In any case, he fired Howard Dean, and they appointed Tim Kaine, sort of a Debbishy kind of nothing, right-of-center Democrat, garden variety character, who did just a nothing, miserable job. And once he left that, he didn't want to stay on. He wasn't any good at it. And then Rahm got Obama to appoint Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So what's that all about? So Debbie Wasserman, when Rahm was the chairman of the DCCC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was one of his lieutenants. She was the chair of a part of the DCCC called the Red to Blue Committee, or the Red to Blue Program. So that's a program that has only one job. If there is a district that has a Republican that would be called Red, and then her job was to replace that person by defeating them in an election with a blue candidate, a Democrat. So that's why Red to Blue. And almost immediately on taking that job, she had a dismal failure. And that's what brought her to the attention of the progressive community. Before that, she was just another, a garden variety, right-of-center Democrat who voted generally okay on social issues, things that have already been accepted. She was a fighter for women's rights, so that was true. But in general, she was always kind of a corporate hack who was motivated by her donations. So she would get lots of money from the sugar industry, from right-wing Cuban groups, from payday lenders, etc. And she would work on their interests. So here's Debbie Wasserman Schultz immediately announcing, upon becoming chairman of the Red to Blue program, that the 3 districts adjacent to hers in South Florida had Republicans who she liked very much, and they were very good friends of hers and close allies, and she would not be helping any Democrats to win those seats, even though there were Democratic candidates who were, each of those seats had a legitimate Democratic candidate, and she downed them and did her best to make sure they couldn't win those seats, which caused an explosion on the left, and progressives went nuts. Rahm Emanuel, was embarrassed. He didn't know what to say. He agreed with her, but he was supposed to do these things in secret, not have a press conference, and eventually he was pressured to fire her. So she was fired from that job. This was in 2008, which was a big Democratic year, but the Democrats didn't win those 3 seats, basically because of her. Subsequently, they won one of the seats. She's continued to protect the other 2, as she does to this day. And right now, she's protecting those seats right this minute. For Republicans. So in any case, that's really when I started following her intensely. I was one of the people who led that argument to get rid of her after this debacle with the 3 Florida seats. And at that point, I looked backwards to see where had she come from, who was this person. And one of the first things I found out was that when she was in the state Senate, she made a deal with the Republicans that had 2 parts. One part allowed her to draw a congressional district that was exactly tailor-made for her. This was a very, very unique and bizarre district that was drawn to do one thing: capture as many Jewish voters in South Florida as possible, regardless of what it looked like. So there would be a boundary line that would go around buildings to capture a building that had a lot of Jewish people in it and leave off another building that didn't have Jewish people. It was the most bizarre and strange district which had no justification whatsoever under any circumstance except to create a district made exactly for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That was it. In return for which, she agreed to a Republican gerrymander of Florida, a 50-50 state, which theoretically should have about the same number of Democrats as Republicans, but that gave the Republicans at least 3 extra seats. There's some argument about how many extra seats they got, but it's certainly not less than 3. And also the state legislature also wound up very, very gerrymandered in favor of the Republicans. She went along with that. She got some of her allies to go along with that as well, and it passed. And it's been a complete catastrophe for the Democratic Party in Florida ever since. They've never been able to gain their footing, even though Democrats can win statewide in Florida. They've been destroyed in terms of the state legislature and the congressional delegation, and that's Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So that even came before 2008. I just looked backwards and saw her that she had been doing that. Then I started noticing the way she votes, which is basically with the Republicans for Republican initiatives. and a lot of them have very, very much to do with who's paying her. And it's not just a matter of a campaign contribution here and there. That's not what this is about. What it is about are groups of industry groups and even family groups who have taken it upon themselves to help build her power inside of Congress. And how do you do that? You do that by letting her direct where you're going to give money. Give every one of these candidates on this list $5,000. Give this guy $8,000. Give this guy $10,000. And then, or give Debbie Wasserman Schultz leadership PAC large sums of money so that she can distribute it to her colleagues. A lot of Democrats are very shy about taking right-wing Cuban money or big sugar money or private prison money or payday lender money. Well, they can get that. They don't have to take it. They can get it from Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She'll get it for them. She doesn't care how filthy she looks. She's filthy. Everyone knows she's filthy. She's not hiding anything. But she then passes out that money, and those people owe her something. What she's mostly interested in, of course, is the ladder up into power. Her dream has always been she wants to be the first Jewish Speaker of the House. That was her dream forever, and I think it still is. And she was always on that track to be the Speaker. Now she has made herself so universally loathed and hated that it'd be very, very hard for her to get it again. But she's just someone who never gives up, which is why I'm not as excited about dumping her as DNC chair. That'll happen in its natural course. That's going to happen. I'm more excited about Tim Canova, the progressive law professor who's running against her. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has never had an opponent, ever. And he is the first one to really oppose her. And everyone always said, well, you can't take her on. She's got so much money. I mean, every lobbyist in Washington will give any unlimited of sum of money to keep her in her position. How is anyone going to ever take her on? And plus, if you go after her, you're dead in Florida politics. She's this really destructive little monster, and she would just murder anyone who tries. I don't mean physically murder, but politically murder anyone who takes her on. And Tim didn't care. And Tim is going after her and has raised nearly $2 million because there's so much universal dislike for her at this point among Democrats that people from all over the country are sending money. I mean, I talked to him about a week ago, and he told me that the average contribution is something under $20. I mean, he told me what it was, but I can't remember. It was like shockingly low. So he's getting a huge number of small donations from people who are just offended by her. Either they're offended by the way she has been so unfair, instead of being a unifier and neutral, which is what the chair of the DNC is supposed to be, she is completely thinks her role is to inaugurate and crown Hillary Clinton, and has done everything in her power to do that. So a lot of people are offended by that. Other people are offended that we should have someone running the Democratic Party who is so obviously not even a Democrat. I mean, yes, she's a Democrat when it comes to, women's issues. She is. She's a Democrat these days when it comes to gay issues. She's fine about those things. She knows how to play those social issues. But when it comes to anything that has to do with economic inequality, count her as a Paul Ryan person. That's where she is. It's something like one of the issues that was the most important to Tim Canova was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Another NAFTA-like unfair trade deal, and she was the first to jump in and not just vote for the Fast Track Authority, which would mean that there couldn't even be any amendments, there couldn't be any changes to the treaty that was secretly negotiated, but she would go and try to strong-arm other Democrats and say, hey, I've given you all this money, I need your help on this. This is her technique. I would hear from members of Congress constantly about telling me, Debbie is pressuring us on this, or Debbie is pressuring us on that. I mean, and it's always something bad. It's never something good. I remember 3 congressmen in a row called me to tell me on the same day that she was walking around the floor of Congress bothering Democrats to vote for this awful Republican bill that was that would just benefit payday lenders.
Hey.
And they none of them wanted to vote. None of them did vote for it. None of them wanted to. And they just they were just frustrated that she's pressuring them and really pressuring hard, and kind of subtly threatening them and cajoling them in different methods of trying to get them to vote for this payday lender thing, and they didn't want to. And they didn't.
Hey, Hallie, I got to
Yes.
introduce you again. We were speaking with Hallie Klein, retired record executive from president of Reprise Records, and I had a couple of comments here. Number one, it looks like she's done the same thing as Tom DeLay, what she's done in Florida, what Tom DeLay did for Texas. It seems like, and also today in Think Progress, it appears like she's co-sponsoring the legislation that would delay and permanently muffle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rules on small dollar lenders. So
On payday lenders.
payday
Yes.
lenders, yeah. I think it looks like that bill's going to go through. So.
It will go through. It'll go through, but it'll be vetoed by President Obama.
Well, hopefully.
And it's not as likely to get through the Senate. It might, but he's not going to go for it. And I'm sure Elizabeth Warren will do all that she can to stop it in the Senate anyway. I should mention right now that she isn't the only bad Democrat on this. She's one of them. Patrick Murphy, who is even worse than she is in terms of policy. He's running for the U.S. Senate in Florida against Alan Grayson. He is the Democratic lead sponsor of this bill. So it's a Republican bill that was written by the Republicans, and they needed a lead sponsor from the Democrats, and it was Patrick Murphy was number one, and then Debbie and a couple of other really bad and very, very corrupt Democrats, the ones who were always taking money from bad sources and doing what those bad sources want. Alcee Hastings is another one like that. Lois Murphy is another one like that. There are a bunch of really, really bad ones. But Murphy and Wasserman Schultz are the two worst.
Are they both? Are they all Florida representatives and senators?
Yes. They're Florida Congress people, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Bush won the Florida presidential election. Katherine Harrison was accused of skewing the vote, and Dade County officials had lost a whole bunch of ballots for Gore, and yet Gore never challenged that in court. He could have. There was definitely grounds enough to show cause, but he just let it go. I don't know why he was such a wimp about it.
Well, at that time, the Florida Supreme Court had a majority of Democratic judges who would have ruled in his favor. But you know what happened once the whole thing went to court. The Republican-controlled U.S. Supreme Court didn't even make any bones about what they were doing. They basically said, "Hey, this isn't going to be setting any precedents. We're just going to rule on this, and that's it." And they handed the presidency to George W. Bush, even though he didn't get the most votes. He got the second most votes. Al Gore got the most votes. So that was a weird kind of little coup.
Yeah, they cut a deal in the background, and American voters lost. One vote, one person lost. I mean, it seems to go that way quite a bit when we have such things as superdelegates, and we have a ginned-up Democratic National Convention where Hillary has appointed, Debbie Wasserman Schultz has appointed 4 members who are in charge of rules and platform that are not friendly to Bernie.
Right, and not friendly to Bernie, and not friendly to Bernie's what he calls the political revolution. So it's not just about Bernie, but it's about this whole this whole idea of revitalizing American democracy that he's trying to accomplish. Very unfriendly with that, because basically, if that happens, that's the source of power for these people. I mean, they're not sitting in positions of power because they're the smartest or the most creative or the most attractive. They are sitting in power because they can grab the most money. I mean, like I said, a lot of congressmen just, they want the money, but they are embarrassed to take money from private prison industries or to take money, literally take money from organizations that prey on their own constituents. I mean, let's face it. Who gets rich from payday lending, and how do they get rich? Payday lenders charge incredible interest rates. I mean, it's usury. I mean, there were days where people who charged that kind of money would be summarily executed. I mean, Jesus had nothing to say about this. I'm just quite famous, and yet they're preying on poor working families. They're preying on the poorest people in our society, and a lot of members of Congress are a little bit embarrassed about going to them and saying, "Hey, donate to me." So they give them money through Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They'll give the money to her PAC.
Howie, she's operating as a 501c4 in effect, where she takes the dark money and then distributes it.
That's exactly what she is, and that's called leadership. Now, I shouldn't, be insinuating that she's the only one who does that.
Oh no.
All of the leaders, whether we're talking about Paul Ryan or Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell on the Republican side, or we're talking about equally corrupt people on the Democratic side, whether it's Harry Reid or Chuck Schumer or Steny Hoyer in the House. I mean, these people are all like that. That's what their power is all about, and that's why we have the kinds of rules that we have. The rules that are written, the laws that are written so as to define what they do is okay. I mean, is there any sane person in the United States that would look at the absolute bribery that goes on? I mean, someone pays or someone contributes, to these people's campaigns, and when I say contributes, I'm not talking about giving them a few $1,000s. I'm talking about people who are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then they get special treatment. Well, anybody sane or rational would say, yes, that is bribery. That's what bribery is. But it isn't, because Congress gets to define technically what is breaking the law and what their version of what bribery is legislatively and judicially. And they cut out a little area that they operate in and define it as not bribery. This is not bribery, but it is bribery. And the whole system is based on bribery. And that's why it's so important to when we have a chance to elect people like Bernie or like Tim Canova, who's running against Wasserman Schultz, or someone like Zephyr Teachout, who's running in New York State, or Pramila Jayapal, who's running, I think, near your district anyway, right? She's
running in a Seattle district, yeah. And we have Shishama Sawant, who's a socialist who got elected to the Seattle City Council and has effectively led the charge for a $15 an hour raise for low-income workers. So, and that is I've got to admit, that is a ramped proposal. So it's going to be slow, so the small businesses can keep up with it as they pay their workers more, and hopefully a living wage. It's very expensive to live in Seattle, as it is in most large cities.
Live in Los Angeles, and it's very expensive to live in New York, and it's very expensive to live in San Francisco. You know what? It's very expensive to live anywhere that's nice.
Right, exactly. Hey,
if you want to find someplace cheap to live, go live in the middle of Kansas.
Well, we are just about out of time, and why don't you drop the name of your blog spot again? And
it's easy. It's downwithtyranny.com. Downwithtyranny.com. And if you go there, you'll find a box that says Blue America, and that's the Blue America PAC. We use the Blue America PAC to channel money, to funnel money, not to the Debbie Wasserman Schultzes of the world, but to people like Tim Canova, who's running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, to people like Pramila Jayapal, who we're supporting, and people like Zephyr Teachout, and people like Bernie Sanders. So hopefully your listeners think, oh, I have $5, I'll go there.
And there's also at rootsaction.org, there is a petition now with 36,000 signers. Remove Debbie Wasserman Schultz as the DNC chair, and that's pretty hot too. I checked that out this morning, in fact, and put my name on it.
There are several petitions going around by organizations. Roots Action is one of them. There are several others, and between all of them, there are far over 100,000 people now demanding that she be replaced. Obama certainly doesn't care about that. I mean, it doesn't matter to him if there were 5 million people demanding she be replaced. She'll be replaced when Obama leaves office, and Hillary Clinton is too embarrassed to keep her on, and they'll give her some other plum job.
All right, a cabinet position. Right. Hey, I want to thank you so much for being on the air with us today, Howie Klein, and it was a pleasure speaking with you yesterday off the air, and I hope to have another interview with you again in the future.
Thanks, Kim. If you have any ideas about wanting to talk to me about anything, count on it. I'm probably thinking about it, so call me anytime.
All right. Hey, appreciate that. Have a great day, Howie.
Bye, Kim.
Bye-bye. This is KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio, and this is also Parallel University, and I'm your host, Kim Dobson. And he is another guy who's got a blog, and we're going to be talking about neocons, and neocons seem to be very dear to Hillary Clinton because she's got Paul Kagan on her list of advisors. So we're going to talk about the details of all of that. But before that, the preceding and following comments are not necessarily the opinions of the staff management or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. They are the opinions of the guests and the hosts.
Every day, people struggle through problems silent and alone. If you are struggling with stress, depression, abuse, drugs, or alcohol, you don't have to go through it alone. The Crisis Clinic of Thurston and Mason counties is here to help you through your crisis. Every hour of the year, volunteers are ready to receive your phone call with empathy, openness, compassion, and confidentiality. No crisis is too small. If you're feeling angry, scared, lonely, or depressed, the Crisis Clinic hotline can provide the support you need. Whether it's someone to talk to or help finding resources, they will work hard to find the solutions to help you through your crisis. The Crisis Connection hotline, 360-586-2800. That's 360-586-2800.
Well,
right, as promised, we have Jim Loeb with us. Jim served for some 30 years as the Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Interpress Service and is best known for his coverage of U.S. foreign policy and the influence of the neoconservative movement. And your most recent piece is the neocon liberal hawk convergence is worse than I thought. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure.
Now there's been a lot of talk about Hillary Clinton's cabinet choices or advisors, and I think Mr. Kagan is on her short list of advisors. She's pretty chummy with Henry Kissinger, and probably somewhere back there Paul Rubin and Paul Wolfowitz as well. So where do you want to start with this? There's a lot to talk about, and I read your piece on the neoliberal hawk convergence is worse than I thought.
Well, the piece was written based on a new report that was put out by an organization called the Center for a New American Security, which was created about 10 years ago exactly, essentially by senior former national security officials under Bill Clinton, and was seen as a kind of democratic alternative to, for example, the Center for National and International, for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which had a somewhat more Republican tinge. So both of them now are kind of bipartisan. But one of the founders is Michelle Flournoy. She was one of the designers of this study that was essentially that was written by Bob Kagan and Jamie Rubin. Jamie Rubin was Madeleine Albright's spokesperson during the Clinton administration at the State Department, and Bob Kagan is a kind of major figure in the neoconservative movement. Although he's at Brookings Institution now, which is seen as a somewhat liberal organization, generally democratic in orientation, although strictly nonpartisan. Anyway, they co-chaired a task force on which Michelle Flournoy was seen as Secretary Clinton's likely choice for Secretary of Defense. And this task force produced a report, and that's what the article or the post that I wrote is based upon. And essentially, what this article what this report says is the United States has to be the guarantor, primarily through military dominance, of peace and stability throughout Eurasia and on its fringes, particularly East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and that it has to maintain a kind of containment policy against Russia, pretty assertive containment policy, that it has to maintain quite an assertive containment policy toward Iran. And on China, it's a bit more ambiguous, but it kind of boils down also in that case to we really can't let China get away with anything. We have to be more willing to confront them than we have in the past. So the study was a kind of critique of Obama's policy, and in that respect, it was it was somewhat surprising in its content because of its overall hawkish tone, and the hawkishness had a kind of reflected both a neoconservative view. The neoconservatives have really propagated a narrative that Obama has pursued a policy of strategic retreat, especially
Wouldn't you say, Jim, that Obama has more or less kept on going in the same direction of expanding, saying that he's going to pull out of Iraq, but yet we're just moving the war over into Syria. One of the big things that he's done is Kerry has cut the nuclear deal with Iran, but we're still involved in all of these little proxy wars and supplying weapons to both sides. We're supplying weapons to the Saudis, who are extending those weapons off to the Sunnis and probably through the Sunnis to ISIS. So, and then we're probably arming the Syrian rebels as well to run a counter organization to Bashar, President Bashar. So it looks like he's doing the same thing the neocons have been asking for all along, way back when Bill Clinton was president as well. So it doesn't seem like much has changed, except for Mr. Obama is neocon light.
Well, actually, I don't really agree with that.
You don't?
No, I think, I mean, Obama has escalated more or less against his will. I think it's pretty clear that Obama, and he said this repeatedly, that Obama would like, more than anything, to restore a degree of stability in the Middle East in a way that would permit the United States to pursue, perhaps in the long term, a strategy of what was called offshore balancing, which is the kind of strategy that the United States pursued until the Iranian Revolution in 1979 vis-a-vis the Middle East. That is, to put U.S. military forces more or less over the horizon and not directly on the ground, because I think Obama believes sincerely that the commitment of U.S. military forces on the ground could be quite counterproductive in the long run, especially in light of the fact that, relatively speaking, the United States is not as powerful as it was 40, 50 years ago, and that it has to pay more attention, in particular to Asia, but perhaps to Europe and to other regions as well, that we cannot afford, essentially, to be as committed as we have been with respect to the Middle East, not only from the George W. Bush administration, but even for a couple administrations before that. So I think his overall strategy, or where he would like to take the U.S., is to disengage, achieve some kind of equilibrium in the region that would stabilize it. And that means that some kind of balance of power between Iran and Saudi Arabia in particular that would result in at least a diminution of violence and civil conflict, and particularly sectarian conflict, both in Syria and throughout the region. I think that's what he would like to achieve. But he exists in a political environment, and the politics, and including not just the political politics of a Republican Congress, for example, but also the bureaucratic politics of a very powerful Pentagon, make it very difficult for him to move policy in that direction. So I think he's constantly under pressure to expand the U.S. military presence rather than to contract it. And I think it would be doing him an injustice to say something like he's neocon light, because I think he has really, really serious differences with the kinds of policies that neoconservatives have been pushing for quite a long time. I mean,
So
if the neocons were seriously in power, we would have American troops on the ground in Syria, and we'd have many more American troops on the ground in Iraq, and that hasn't happened.
yeah, I see your point there. Pentagon, the chief weapons buyer for the Pentagon before he was made the general administrator.
Well, no, actually, he didn't serve, but he was in the Clinton administration, and you're basically right. I mean, Carter tends to be pretty hawkish, and you can say, I mean, he himself, for example, is kind of neocon light in the sense that if you go back 23 years right after the Second Gulf War, you can see what Wolfowitz was recommending as the U.S. strategic posture vis-a-vis all of Eurasia. And when he was serving then as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And he wrote, or not he, but people under his domain, including people who reached quite high positions under George W. Bush, wrote a paper which called essentially for the United States to act as the guarantor of peace and security throughout the region and not permit the emergence of any possible peer rival in the entire Eurasian continent by military force if necessary. And Ashton Carter, I think, is in fundamental sympathy with that idea, but he wouldn't phrase it quite as crudely as it was under Wolfowitz when his study leaked out in 1992. That created quite a sensation, and Wolfowitz almost lost his job as a result of it.
Well, yeah, and I guess it also shows that what Obama's been able to do and what has actually happened. It shows the limits of presidential power. I don't know if he could be any stronger of a president than he is. I don't know how that would work. Is it just not in his personality, or is he just has too many people running in opposition to more peaceful methods of getting the job done? I mean, I just think it's very Orwellian spending so much money on armaments and arming groups which claim to be supporting our worldview to keep U.S. dominance in resources and in military control of what we consider to be bad actors.
I mean, they're very powerful interests in Washington, D.C., and these interests pursue what they want in various ways, but they exist. They are part of the political reality, and I think Obama, has to work within that very large, very powerful reality. And I think he in his own way, has tried to change the trajectory of U.S. power and military power and deployment in a different way, similar to the one that I was suggesting, more over the horizon, less ground commitment, and so on. But he will necessarily come in conflict with very powerful forces.
I would say one of those forces is the fact that he has his briefings on drone kills, where he has to decide. He's supposedly the one who gives the authorization for kills of certain Al-Qaeda and ISIS leaders, regardless of the proximity to civilian enclaves nearby. I mean, that must, if he is really committed to a peaceful way out of these conflicts, that is not the way to do it. And I think that's one area where he's being forced to do something he doesn't want to do, if that's true, what you're saying about it.
Well, the question, I mean, he would argue that look, is it preferable to deploy thousands of U.S. troops on the ground, or to use, more selective techniques where U.S. troops don't even appear somewhere? I mean, I think he's fully aware of the costs and benefits of a drone-type strategy, and I have a lot of problems with the drone-type strategy politically not saleable, although certainly some neoconservatives and lots of Republicans and even some Democrats would support it, or he can use this other method, which again is highly questionable, particularly, when there are non-combatant deaths or when the person who's been targeted poses no immediate threat to the United States. Arguably, all of those are violations of international law and the laws of war, and I think he regrets feeling that he has to do that. But again, there are political constraints and forces that work on the office of the presidency. And he has to balance them, and this is kind of how he comes out.
We're speaking with Jim Lowe. Jim served for 30 years in Washington as a Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for Interpress Service, and is best known for his coverage of U.S. foreign policy and the influence of the neoconservative movement. And thank you for joining us today, Jim. And
Sure.
I gotta reintroduce you so people remember if they're joining us late in the discussion. And this business about extending power and going after threats, it makes me, I'm not a young man, but I remember the Cold War, and the Russians were the threat back then. And that was the boogeyman for a while. It was the communist threat.
Right.
But as soon as the Cold War ended, we had to invent a new threat. I mean, the Pentagon always needs a threat. I'm a little bit cynical about military power, as you might have guessed.
Right.
I'm a conscious objector from the Vietnam War, so I have my feelings about these things. That I cynically believe that much of this war that we get involved with they're based upon false flags and threats that aren't really threats, that are more or less stories that are leaked to the press, and the press goes along with it. The Washington Post is a good example of that. They'll print stuff that the government feeds them, and then that starts the drumbeat for another war. So I've watched this over and over again as time has gone on. So I just see a lot of the mainstream media as being a mouthpiece for that sort of propaganda to keep us constantly engaged and more money being spent. The justification for the Pentagon budget is always going up, and domestic spending is always going down because of this. So, I mean, that's just my observation.
I think generally speaking, it's fair to say that the mainstream media in this country, has not exercised a serious, independent, role that's taught in civic classes, and that it generally goes along with a lot of what the government tells them, or what government officials tell them. On the other hand, remember also, like, leaks aren't necessarily orchestrated. I mean, there is not. I mean, if a leak comes from the White House, you can say, well, that's the government. But if there's a leak, for example, from the State Department or somewhere in the Pentagon or somewhere in the intelligence community and so on, that may be evidence of a certain bureaucracy or a certain set of interests pursuing their own agenda. There's no question. The Pentagon has always wanted to justify a budget that increases all the time, and for that reason, it has to create scenarios that create fear in the public and in their representatives in Congress in order to justify, higher budgets. And the services are in competition for higher budgets. And I mean, one thing that's fairly remarkable is that, Obama pretty much encouraged the sequester to happen, and the sequester has limited along and reflect that political environment. If defense industries feel that the domestic market just isn't as promising as it used to be, they have to look to sell more weapons to foreign countries, and therefore, that's one reason why the United States continues to support the Saudis and sell them lots and lots of weapons, even though the Saudis are conducting a disastrous war against much of Yemen. The administration is not happy about this war, but it has to contend with interest in the defense industry, which employ a lot of people in a lot of districts around the country who want to continue to have good relations with Saudi Arabia and don't want to see a president sour those relations unnecessarily. And so we've been pretty passive, even though I know from personal contact that very senior Pentagon officials are very unhappy with the Saudis and the way they're conducting this war. There haven't just now they decided not to provide the Saudis with more cluster bombs, but they haven't put any real pressure on the Saudis to make the political compromise necessary to stabilize Yemen or to give it some new governing structure that might reduce the various conflicts that are going on there. So, the president has a pretty tough job.
Yeah, he certainly does, and I'm sorry to say we're out of time, Jim, and it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I'll be following your blog, your writings here. Can you give us the address of your writings? I guess it's Loeb Log Foreign Policy. I guess we could find it.
It's www.loblog.com, but frankly, I do very little writing for it at this point. It's mainly people who are really expert in U.S. policy in the Middle East in particular who contribute to the blog, and it's mostly their writings that deserve the attention.
As a journalist. All right. Hey, thank you for joining us today, Jim
Sure.
Loeb, and appreciate your comments and your point of view and experience.
Sure.
And have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio, and this has been Parallel University. I'm your host, Kim Dobson. Be back again next week for another program at this time, 12 to 1, every Thursday. I think we have some more folks coming in to do music. I'm not sure if it's going to be called Connect the Dots or not, but the preceding comments are not necessarily the opinions of the staff management or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. They are the opinions of the guests and the hosts. Thank you for listening to Chaos. Have a great day.